We would like to welcome everyone to our webinar today. My name is John Payne, and I'm the Director of Technology for the Rural Life Grant. Give me just a minute to mute this speaker on another computer if I can. There we go. Hopefully that'll avoid any feedback that we might have. With us today, we have Richard Bales, who's our Director of Instructional Practice, and also Dr. Richard Kissmiller, who's the Vice President of the Niswonger Foundation. Just as a couple of housekeeping things as we begin, we are recording the webinar, okay? Also, this is the first webinar that we've done as part of Rural Life, so we're hoping that everything will go okay today. You will notice that as a participant, at the bottom of your screen, there is a question and answer button. And when you click on that, you have the ability to type in any questions that you have. This will provide us with a little bit of a back channel, and we invite you to do that as we go through the webinar today, and then we can respond either orally or in writing to your questions that you have. At the end of the webinar, we're also going to try to unmute everyone so that you have the ability to ask any questions that you have that way as well. When we do unmute you, what will happen is a little pop-up will appear, okay? And you have the ability to decide whether you want to be unmuted or not. But we'll try that at the end when we get down to the question and answer part, okay? Now, before we actually dive into our presentation, let me just check a couple of things here, okay? Somebody's trying to chat. There it is. All right, very good. Somebody was just remarking that we had some feedback going on. I think muting the speaker on this second computer I had probably took care of that for us. If you run into anything else like that, just put a post up in the question and answer, and we'll try to respond back that way. So now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Richard Bales to begin us into our main part of our presentation. And once again, we'll just try to work our way through this and see how we get along.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are so respectful of your time, especially in May at each of the school sites, so we appreciate you giving us some time. If you do notice some folks who are not here, you might remind them that this is being recorded, and we will send out the link probably sometime in the next couple days. My job is to share a little bit about the treatment schools. We have randomly selected 36 treatment schools. From the 72, that means 36 will go into the control schools after 2 years. Our schools range in location from Sevier County, who we're happy to have on board, all the way to Unicoi, Carter, and Sullivan County. We do have a school in Johnson County that is in the control group. So we cover quite a bit of territory. Our schools also range in size from 40 students in grades 6th, 7th, and 8th to 1,200 students in grades 6th, 7th, and 8th. Up next, you should see a map of the treatment and control schools. You can see the territory that the grant will be covering. The main access to the grant, the point will be the literacy coaches that we've hired. That will be the main resource for each of the schools. And Dr. Kitzmiller will talk a little bit later on about those resources. I'd like to introduce you to our coaches who've been selected. Let me start off by saying we had a group of about 40 applicants of some of the most, I guess, innovative and experienced professionals that I've been able to interview in my career. We were able to select 9 outstanding literacy coaches with varied backgrounds coming from various areas throughout Northeast Tennessee. Just to give you a little bit of background about each of those coaches. First, we have Candace Herman, and she is currently a high school English teacher with Greene County Schools. She's also taught middle grades, and she lives in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Next, we have Brooke Drennan. Brooke lives in Morristown, but is employed by Hancock County. She also teaches high school English, and this year she's also teaching speech and journalism. So we're happy to have both Brooke and Candace. From Kingsport City Schools, we have Sarah Kitts-Miller. Sarah is currently an instructional design specialist. She's also served as classroom teacher, an academic coach, and also assistant principal. Sarah comes with a great and varied background of experiences in working with students and with teachers. Mary Nell McIntyre is a retiring elementary principal from Johnson City Schools. She spent more than 30 years in the classroom and as a school level leader. She resides in Jonesboro. We're happy to welcome Lori Rourke. Lori is a teacher in Carter County Schools, and in talking with Lori, she fills a number of leadership roles in her school and her district. It's very well respected, as are all of our literacy coaches. She's also taught as an adjunct faculty member. Allison Seeley Smith is a high school teacher at Science Hill High School. Allison has taught at several middle schools and high schools across Tennessee. In addition, she has served as a curriculum coach at the middle grades level. Our remaining 3 literacy coaches are Christy Snyder from Jefferson County. She is currently a middle grades English language arts teacher. She has several degrees, as do all of our candidates. She's also taught some online courses at the college level. Linda Stewart is currently teaching at Cosby Elementary in Cott County. Linda has served as, in addition to classroom teacher, has worked closely with data and is also the response to intervention coordinator for her school. Ben Willings comes from Jefferson County. Ben is currently a teacher with Jefferson County Schools. I think he works with grades 4 and 5. Currently, he's also involved with numerous innovations at the school level and is also very involved and enthusiastic about technology. So those are our 9 coaches for this coming year. I think they're going to be great. I have been a past school and system level leader, and it's exciting to me to have this kind of quality of coach going into the schools. I'd be proud to have any of the 9 come into my school or my district. That's how confident I feel about those folks. And now to talk about the school plan, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kitts-Miller. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Glad that you joined us today for the webinar. This is our first look at our school plan. We certainly are not going to try to overwhelm you with details today, but we have been asked, legitimately asked, well, what does the school plan look like? And can you give us some examples of the kinds of plans that we might come up with? So that's what we're attempting to do, is just introduce the concept today, and we'll have more follow-up support later on. So if we're talking about a school plan for middle grades literacy, I'm going to interject a little bit of elementary science refresher course work for us to talk especially about the idea of leverage. So let's remember some diagrams that we may have seen from elementary science. We know the idea of a leverage point in the middle, and we know that on the playground, for instance, 2 60-pound children can balance each other, or with a little bit of foot action, they can lift each other up and down. So depending on where the fulcrum is, though, changes things. And so we can see that with a little bit of movement of the fulcrum, 5 kilograms of effort can balance 100 kilograms. So so we see that idea that a small problem-solving force can have a large effect on system behavior if you have a high leverage point. So we're going to shift from the diagrams into a situation that's a little bit more realistic and more practical. Springtime, folks think about clearing a spot for a garden, whether it's flowers or vegetables. And you might see this example of a lever in a garden. Someone uses a crowbar to try to move a rock. And so we're going to talk about this particular diagram, and we're going to talk about how our rural life resources can be a small problem-solving force that has a large effect on system behavior if your school plan is at a point that's a high leverage point. So we're going to stop here just for a second and talk several things before we get into the actual diagram of what the school plan may look like. In this scenario, as we said, the fulcrum is going to be your school plan, and the effort is going to be the resources that rural life can bring to that. And more important than the amount of resources, the most important aspect of this diagram is, where is the fulcrum? If you're going to move the problem, or if you're going to influence the situation, the fulcrum has to be first and foremost placed at the proper spot. And we're thinking that the fulcrum needs to be very close to the problem or the situation you're trying to influence. Now, we are leaving it up to individual schools to come up with 36 individual school plans, because if we tried to impose a school plan on the variety of different situations out there, it would be as silly as us putting a fulcrum in the middle of every garden, all 36 gardens, put it right in the middle of the garden and hope to move things around. Well, that's not likely to happen or to have much effect. So another thing here is the idea of the fulcrum needs to have a strong base of support. You need to be thinking about, where do I have the strong professional leadership that might influence the school plan? And if your school plan involves some technology solutions, do you have a strong infrastructure that would carry the plan? So you need to think about the base where you're putting your school plan. You need to decide where you're placing it, what problem are you choosing to address. Then we can put the crowbar and the resources to that and help you make the changes. Now, the resources that we can talk about, and this will be the first time that we mention some of this, but the resources that we talk about especially include the coaches. We have 36 schools and 9 coaches. So on average, each of you has a fourth of a full-time person who's dedicating their full year to helping your school. That is a valuable resource. The coaches can bring lots of expertise. They can bring mentoring. They can bring resources. They can bring ideas and do demonstration classes, help you in planning. So coaching is a valuable resource. We also will be able to, just a second, we're having some technical problems. Okay, back to our resources. We have the coaches, valuable resource. We also have funding that we can announce for the first time. We think that each of the schools, as you're developing your plan, can initially estimate between $7,000 and $18,000 for the initial draft of your plan. We hope even by the second year to have additional funding to supplement the kinds of things you're going, but we think that from 7,000 to 18,000 would be the range based on the needs of the school. The needs of the school could vary according to the size of the school, the resources that are already in place, and a number of things. But I think you can understand the idea of a range from $7,000 to $18,000 of things you can purchase or stipends that you can designate. So the coaches and the money are two primary resources. Another one is that each school will have at least one lead teacher, and the lead teacher will be a primary point of contact. They will facilitate communication within the school, and they'll have some extra opportunities for professional development. Another resource is that our school leaders will also be getting some group work and some professional learning opportunities as well, in addition to what your school plan calls for spending. So when you're coming up with an effective literacy plan for your school, we have looked at this and are still playing with it a little bit, but we think that as you're planning out the different kinds of things you could do, there are different components that could be considered. You could, for instance, talk about the strengthening literacy development across the content areas, across all the subject areas within your school. You may decide that's not what we need to do. We need to focus on the second component, which is interventions for struggling readers and writers. You might say, well, we're going to work on the culture of our school, the structures, the policy, maybe the schedule, maybe some other things about the school as a component. You may focus on building some leadership in literacy in your school, or you may think of ways to support teachers to improve instruction and with a focus on professional development. So with that, this is the first look you've had at what the action plan will actually look like. The final plan will be as simple as this. It will have, it will have one or more strategies. And in just a second, we're going to give you some examples of strategies. But it will have one or more strategies, one or more action steps, who's responsible, what are the resources, and is there a budget implication for that? So you might have 1, 2, or 3 strategies with 3, 4, or 5, or 6 or 10 action steps and a timeline, and we would need to know when to make the money available or when to make the coaching available. Now, we have been asked specifically for what are some sample plans. Okay, so in the first area, strengthening literacy development across the content areas, one of the things that a school could decide to do is to activate some discussion on reading and writing strategies. And this is the kind of thing that a coach could certainly help with. And you can see that if you schedule time for department meetings, if you share effective strategies, and if you have strategies in a newsletter, those are things that could make an improvement across the content areas, and they wouldn't cost much in terms of money. However, on the other hand, if you wanted to if you wanted to do another example of, if you wanted to do another more costly look at developing reading across the content areas or literacy across the content areas, you could say that our ideas are to expand the library or to explore options for electronic text databases. Those would have a higher budgetary implication. So some things would not be very costly, some things would be. All right, if you go to the next category, we're going to have 2 strategies for literacy interventions for struggling readers or writers. Well, one thing your school could decide to do was to purchase and implement a reading program for the lowest quartile of students. And you can see that some of these would not have a budgetary implication. Some of them might be very expensive if you were buying a literacy program from scratch. Also, if you wanted to focus, you could say that our school has more problems in the writing area, and you could decide that implement a school-wide writing program would be what you would choose as our literacy intervention for struggling readers. In the third category of school policies, structures, and culture, you could say that we want to develop thematic units. We want to coordinate the curriculum and instruction across the subject areas, and much of that work would be work that you could do in grade level team time, very minor budgetary implementation, develop some curriculum work, but you could form committees that might have summer stipends. That would have a budgetary implication, so we put a moderate budget implication over here. Another one you could do would be in the school policy structures would be say, we really want to learn how to use formal and informal assessment instruments better. We want to change the culture, that we're going to be more data oriented, and you can see some examples of strategies here and examples of the kind of budget thing that you would need here. And notice here that the resources include time to meet during the summer, stipends, and time to plan, those kinds of things. So this is another example for that particular component. If you wanted to focus on leadership capacity within your school, you might engage in classroom-based research, or you might have demonstration classrooms in each content area. You might say, we want to scatter throughout the school and have some leaders that are model classrooms, and we can spread good practices that way. And you might want to support your teachers to improve instruction by providing opportunities to present at local, state, and national conferences. And we can certainly, if your school plan calls for it, we can fund that. Or you may want to engage in coaching, peer observation, and collaborative planning. There might be a need for substitute coverage. If you're going to have teachers visiting other teachers' rooms, substitute coverage could be a resource you could build into your plan. So we're back now to the development plan. We just have looked at 10 different strategies. We've done it quickly, so you can go back and look at it. Plus, we'll have additional time later to look at it. We've also gone through about 30 examples of quickly of action steps. What we didn't do was put a timeline on it. We didn't put a responsibility, and we didn't put a dollar amount on the budget. But again, this is much like what your finalized plan will be. You may have 1, 2, or 3 strategies. You may have 5, 6, or 7 action steps that match those strategies. You may have resources listed over here. Some of them may be time. Some of them may have a budget implication. So you'll be simply turning in a sheet like this for us to talk with you about in terms of approving a plan. Now, without belaboring the point, I do want to introduce just one other idea that we have built into the grant, and we've already started talking to folks about, is there are different ways to personalize learning. And we will need to, either as a planning tool or as we monitor progress, we will need to know and help think through, are we looking at which of these core principles are we looking at? Are we looking at personal learning paths for students? Are we looking at learner profiles? Are we doing a competency-based progression? Or are we looking at making more flexible learning environments? So within this, we will gradually tease this out, or it can help you plan what kinds of things do you want to do for your plan. So ultimately, we'll have a workshop like this that has the different components across the top, and we will have the core components that of personalized learning down the left. And your school may choose to focus on leadership capacity on flexible learning environments, which would be here. And you may choose to work on struggling readers and writers by looking at learner profiles. That could be 2 examples of a school plan. So, I'm sorry, just a second. Okay, so with resources, we won't try to illustrate that today, but to help you in your planning for each of these areas, the 5 across the top and the 4 down the left, we will have resources that will be available to you in an electronic format that illustrate what do these look like. So you may have folks at your school that want to study this deeper and start getting examples. We will have articles and we will have video clips that illustrate what each of these areas look like to help the plan become more real as you develop it or as you implement it in your school. So this worksheet and the school plan will be the basis of a second webinar that we have in a few weeks, and it will be the basis of several discussions that we have with you in the next few weeks as well. And now I'd like to turn it back to Dr. Bales to cover some last minute things that are important for today's webinar.
Okay, just to sort of recap what Dr. Kitzmiller just said, we've given you examples of possible literacy plans. John and Dr. Kitzmiller put together 2 examples actually of each of those. What I don't want you to go away with today is thinking I have to use one of those, but you may very well use one of those. So we don't want to limit your creativity or your thinking, or really looking at what your school needs, because those may or may not be appropriate for your school. Some key dates that I'd like to talk about. When the school plans are due, as you've seen, we're not expecting a full-fledged 40-page document. The plan is really fairly simple once you decide on what your needs are and what you'd like to do. So we are putting a June 30th deadline on that. We will take them before that time if you have them ready. I'd also like to offer up, we are happy, Dr. Kitzmiller or myself are happy to come meet with your schools or your school if you need assistance or if you just like some feedback. We're happy to do that face-to-face or phone call or whatever works best for you and your school. We will have a dead period in terms of spending dollars. So from September 1st through September 30th, we have to have that dead period to where we make no purchases. So the purchases would need to go out prior to that date or after that date. So you may think through that as you develop your plan about when you'd like to have those resources in place. But we do have to have that dead period. June 5th and 6th, we will be having a professional development session. This will be for lead teachers, and the coaches will also be present. I do have a confirmation today. Thank you, Greene County Schools, for hosting us. That will be at Chuckie Oak High School in the cafeteria. And I will send out an email with these dates as soon as the webinar is over. For coaches who are on the webinar today, we will have a June 7th, that's coaches only date. We will then have in July 2 dates. June 11th will also be coaches only, and I'm not putting that date up here, but July 12th will be a professional development session for the school principals. So we'd like for each school principal to attend, and the literacy coaches will also be there, and that is for the afternoon only. The location is to be determined. That will go out in the email I'm sending out as well. The email I'm sending out will go to treatment school principals, literacy coaches, district personnel who are involved in their district with this grant. So some key supports that we'll have available. I've mentioned before the site visit support from our staff here at Rural Life, if you'd like it, or if you'd just like some feedback or whatever works for you. We really want to try to personalize the supports just like we are the plans. So you let us know what works for you and we'll try to provide whatever that is. I'd also like to let you know that on June 19th at the Foundation Symposium, we will have designated sessions for Rural Life participants only during that day. So if there are things that we need to go back over or review or talk about plans more in depth at that particular location and date, then we can do that. I guess at this time, that's actually the end of our presentation, and we're happy to take questions now, or if you prefer to email your question later, whatever works for you. Does anyone out there have questions?
Now, what I'm going to do is unmute our panelists first. We have Larry Nees with us, also from the Niswonger Foundation, and we have Theresa Gibson and Nancy Magnum from the Friday Institute. So I think I've unmuted their mics if they wish. As far as attendees, what I'd like to ask you to do, we're going to try this. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little raise your hand button. If you have a question, if you would just simply click raise your hand, we'll be able to see who the attendee is and we'll unmute you one at a time. And then on your screen, it will give you a little pop-up and you have the opportunity to unmute your mic and state your question or whatever. And hopefully that will eliminate any feedback we might have or anything like that, okay? So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and we'll do our best to find you and unmute you, okay? We have one from Scott A. Let me allow you to talk. You should be unmuted.
Scott, are you there?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Oh, that's Amy Scott. Hey, Amy Scott.
I'm beamed in.
Hey there. What's your
Hey.
question, Amy?
Okay, I would like to know, can we submit a plan with a budget for year 1 and year 2 at the same time? If we're looking at a progressional PD plan?
We would ask you to do a tentative plan for both years, and we will be expecting schools to want to change them, and we will also be hoping to add to the budget. So yes, the answer is yes, we would like a tentative 2-year plan with the expectation that there'll be changes.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to say you're bound by that plan, but that would be great in terms of long-term, long-range planning. I think that'd be awesome.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
If you have any other questions, just raise your hand. We'll try to find you real quick, unmute you, and let you ask.
So John, it looks like, this is Nancy from the Friday Institute. It does look like there's a question in the chat. Someone left a question in the chat about, is there a specific template for these plans?
Okay, answer that one.
I think we can send out this simplified template that Dr. Kitzmiller shared earlier. Is that right, Dr. Kitzmiller?
Yeah, we actually had 2 slides in here that showed what the template will look like, each of the categories. When we send the actual plan, it will be probably have more rows to it than we had in the slides. But the categories will be the same as we showed on the sample plans, at least on 2 slides today.
I would like to add too, on the June 5th and 6th training dates, they'll be going over, the Friday Institute will be going over more specifics on the personalization component. And so I think that'll be able to support people with more information on those 2 training dates.
Jonathan Fields, we're not ignoring you. For some reason, when I try to allow you to talk and unmute you, I keep getting an error message that pops up. Yeah, if you would just type your question in for us. There's a Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to answer it that way.
So,
I have Jonathan's question. Jonathan's question is, do principals need to attend the 5th and 6th? No, you do not need to, Jonathan. That will be for your the lead teachers and the literacy coaches. Principals, I would ask to attend the July date of July 12th, and that'll be the afternoon, and I'll send you an email about that. If you feel like you don't have a lead teacher by that point, Jonathan, you'd be welcome to attend. And that goes for any principal. The next question is, does the money portion depend on the project or size of the school or something different? Yes, yes, and yes. I think it depends on the project, but we also have to take a look at school size because that variation is great. But what we don't want to do is give you a dollar amount and say, yes or no, we will fund that. What we really want to do is to look at your ideas and then really take a look at the plan and see at least how much we could afford for that. Candace Herman has a question. Do you know when we would anticipate conducting a records review with our respective schools in order to gain preliminary insight into anticipated school literacy needs? That's a big old question, Candace. I would anticipate that the coaches would be provided access to their assigned school and principal at some point, at least prior to school. We also have to think in terms of work the first few weeks of school. So late July, I would imagine that you would be able to get into those records and be able to have some conversation with the school principal that you're assigned to. We have an anonymous attendee saying, what kind of data is required to justify or determine the problem? I think we certainly will look at hard data that the principal and teachers will have in terms of their reading achievement levels or value-added levels, but we also will look at those soft data like what do teachers think are the issue, what does the principal think is the issue, and what conversations have you had. So honestly, we will look at any kind of data that the school thinks is important and is valued. Okay,
These have been answered.
I think we've answered all the questions. We've tried to keep this brief. Again, it is being recorded, so we will put it up. Principals, if we could have some idea about your lead teacher. Again, I'm sending you all an email as soon as this webinar is over with all the details about dates and times and also what requests we've made today. Just to wrap up again, I'd like to offer our services if you need help or would like some feedback on some ideas. We're happy to help, and we really want to make a difference in your schools for your students in terms of reading, and I look forward to all the things that we will be able to do together. Dr. Kitzmiller, John, yes. Thanks to Mr. Payne for all his work today and setting everything up for 3 amateur webinar presenters. Thank you all for your time today. We really appreciate you and look forward to working more closely with you in the future.
Yes, thank you.